Hello everyone, my name is Tim B. Green and this is Crush It Club episode 45, Embrace Contradiction. Now, it took me quite a long time to understand this, I guess. This is, even though it's been a couple of years now, I would say one of the most powerful, life-changing revelations about the way I think about things. And this still happens. I seek for this to happen, which is why I love the last book I listened to. Which I did in a review of yesterday, which is the Power of Regret, because I like stuff, in a sense you could say I love to be wrong. It's less about that I love to be wrong, but it's more about the fact that I love anything that reverses or violates my expectations or violates what I think I know in a way that helps me understand the nature of reality better. So it's really a refinement in what I know. The best example of this would be when you do chemistry in high school. You know, first of all, you have the bread pudding and it's just all these protons and electrons floating around in goo like raisins in bread pudding. And then as different scientific models came out saying, well, it can't be that way because when we shoot electrons through, well, there's one part where there's deflection and there's other parts where you get electrons bouncing straight back. The pattern of, I believe it would be called electron diffraction, I could be wrong about that, or refraction, one of those two. The pattern that appears when you shoot electrons through a piece of gold foil shows that it can't be an even distribution like that. It's got to be something else. So then we came up with the nuclear model of the atom where there was a concentration of positive charge in the center with electrons floating around, and that explained that behavior. And so on, right? So this is why today we're talking about contradiction of or embracing contradiction, because oftentimes contradiction is just a refinement of our understanding. If it completely violates what we understand, there is probably something wrong with that. Either your former model is completely wrong or it's partially wrong and you can't see where the two merge. And this is what I mean by embracing contradiction. Now, I love what Michael C. Gelb said. I think it's Michael C. Gelb, Michael G. Gelb, no, Michael C. Gelb, I believe, in his book, How to Think Like Leonardo Da Vinci, which is a wonderful book because it talks about probably my most timeless mentor, which is Leonardo Da Vinci. In that book, he talked about something, and Italians, please forgive me, I didn't look this up before, but I looked it up last week, Sfumato. So Sfumato is a Renaissance art technique. And if I remember correctly, and this is from Michael J. Gelb's book, it translates to up in smoke. And the reason I have a rather familiar character here is in the Mona Lisa, Da Vinci showed very clearly this technique. So this technique, if you look here on the edge of her hair, you notice that her hair and the background, there is a gradient of transition. And also between in her eyes, that it isn't sharp, it's a gradual changing of shading. And where her skin ends and her hair begins is unclear. That's sfumato. In other words, it's a blurring or transitioning where there's no clear, sharp distinction. Now, in a video, or let's think of this in graphic arts, I believe it would be called anti-aliasing, where you blur the edge, a sharp edge, like somebody's skin. Of course, we got chroma key going on right now, but where it isn't uber sharp distinction between the foreground edges and the background, that you blur the pixels on the edge so that it looks natural, so that it looks more like what you see with your eyes and what you see in a photograph. So it doesn't look fake, like one image literally stuck over another, but it looks like the background is a real background and the foreground is somebody standing in front of that real background. Okay, so it essentially does that. And in the book, Gelb talks about this as being one of the properties that allows you to think like Da Vinci, to think like the astronomical level of genius he expressed, especially for the time he existed and the state of knowledge and science back then. And that is to be able to hold two contradictory, or I would suggest seemingly contradictory ideas in your head at one time. So that capacity to hold on to two contradictory ideas simultaneously, Gelb described as Sfumato, right? Up in smoke, that the transition from one thing to another can exist and does exist simultaneously, and both those seemingly contradictory are simultaneously true. This is really important, especially in the divisive time we live, where everybody is 100% a sharp edge. This is right and this is wrong. I still have things that I believe are right and other things that I believe are not right. They are wrong, as in incorrect, not morally wrong, but incorrect. So where I came to actually understand this or appreciate this was I was watching a Google talk. I'd watched a TED talk from one of my students about I don't even remember what, and I don't even remember the Google talk, but the speaker either began or ended this fascinating talk, this Google talk, with a quote from a fellow named George M. Box. Now, he was, I believe, a statistician who had said, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So I thought that was really interesting, because it's like, so we can have two things that we think of as being contradictory. That is, one being right disproves the correctness of the other. And I realized not necessarily. So I came up with my own version of this, not only from, let's say that, not only from ego, but because I believe it's also true and even more correct at describing the nature of reality, the nature of two simultaneously true but seemingly contradictory things, because they're not contradictory. Contradiction is proof that our understanding is incomplete. So my version, based on George M. Box's version of his brilliant quote, is all models are incomplete, but some models are more accurate. So there are many things that we understand, like especially if you go down to the quantum level, and things that are true on the quantum level, people then generalize to the macro level at high temperatures and in wet conditions, where the quantum effects, if they occur at all, are probably statistically canceled out by other opposing quantum effects, which is why people believe wrongly. They take one extreme version, the quantum entanglement that I've talked about before, which has absolutely nothing to do with the way you think and causation in the macroscopic universe. So believing something is true, believing it will come to you if you think about it, is absolute scientific nonsense. But because they believe, well, it must be true on the subatomic level, then it must be true everywhere. And that's just a lack of understanding of a more complete model, because it is only up to the scale, when I last checked, which was very recently, of a fifth of the width of a human hair that humans have ever been able to witness quantum effects, and that was in an isolated condition at near absolute zero. So you don't think mindlessly about things. You don't abandon what you know, but when something comes up that contradicts what you know, think of how could this and that, one thing contradicting another, what you formerly believed and still believe to be true based on evidence, and a new thing which seemingly contradicts it, think, how are these two incomplete models a more complete model that gives a clearer model of reality or understanding of anything? That's it for Crush It Club 45. Embrace contradiction. My name is Tim B. Green. Bye for now.